So if the former contractors do win this case, then, as you say, the likes of Bush and other high US ranking officials, both former and current, they really could, do you think, face trial on this?
Well, they should face trial. If you break the law, you're supposed to face trial. The great travesty here being that they're not facing criminal trials. They carried out massive war crimes for years and years and years, with total disaster wreaked around the globe, and set back our international human rights treaties nearly 500 years. We don't even have habeas corpus for a number of those folks in Guantanamo and in the black sites for a very long time.
Two American war veterans can go ahead with a civil lawsuit over allegations they were wrongfully held and tortured in Iraq by the US forces. Donald Rumsfeld, former country's Secretary of Defence, could be found personally liable in this. The two men worked for a private security company in Iraq in 2006 when they highlighted concerns their firm was engaged in corruption. Let's get more from Brian Becker from the Anti-War Coalition, who's joining us now from Washington tonight. Hi there, Brian. Now, these two men said they were detained for 9 months in retaliation for efforts to reveal illegal activities by their employer. That's their story. How much would the former Bush and current Obama administration want to get their case dismissed?
Well, it's obviously a top priority, clearly, for the Bush administration and all the Bush-era officials who could also be stripped of immunity and held liable for crimes committed during their watch. But it's also a priority for the Obama administration, which, ironically, is the entity providing defense for Donald Rumsfeld. What the Seventh Circuit, the Court of Appeals, ruled is that if Donald Rumsfeld's policies knowingly violated the American Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, if they engaged or allowed the engagement of illegal activities like torture, that he does not have immunity from prosecution or from civil suit. And so this opens the door to what is growing as a movement inside the United States and internationally for accountability and consequences for crimes committed during the Bush era.
Now, a court has ruled that former Pentagon Chief Donald Rumsfeld has got no immunity in this case. Do you believe he could, though, ever be brought to justice if found guilty?
Well, what Rumsfeld would be held liable for right now in the case of a civil action is not criminal penalties, but civil penalties. In other words, money and other possible relief, injunctive relief that the plaintiffs may be seeking. But what we have to recognize is that by stripping Rumsfeld of immunity for the acts of torture against American citizens, this opens wide the door not only for Rumsfeld but for Dick Cheney, for Bush, for all of those who advocated or put into place policies like the policy of torture, which they call enhanced interrogation techniques, euphemistically and very thinly euphemistically disguising torture, which is illegal. Then that means all of these people could be in the dock. In the United States, for instance, there's a movement, an online movement called Indict Bush Now, which calls for the indictment of Rumsfeld, Cheney, Bush. 170,000 Americans have signed up, also in line with the court's decision demanding accountability and consequences for crimes committed during the Bush era.
Brian, is there a link here to nationality of who allegedly committed the crimes as well? I mean, there have been other lawsuits in the past against the US government over allegations of abuse and torture overseas, but most involved foreigners, so they've easily been dismissed by US courts. Now, of course, this one's different because it's American citizens dealing in American courts. It seems the courts are therefore taking a different approach, hence the U-turn, yeah?
Well, very possibly the court might have thought the fact that these are U.S. citizens and not Afghans or Iraqis or Pakistanis, others who have been subjected to the same and perhaps even, and I'm saying with certainty, much far worse abuse in the hands of their U.S. jailers. Maybe the court used this as a way to give itself some space, but the fact of the matter is once immunity is stripped from Rumsfeld, once he has to stand trial for torture, which is what these men are alleging, then it opens the door wide, not only in the United States but internationally, for similar court actions. And I think you'll see those percolating up. This could be the tip of the iceberg in terms of the movement for accountability and consequences for torture and other crimes committed during the Bush era.
Brian, briefly, just looking at the response from the Rumsfeld side, a lawyer representing Donald Rumsfeld, not surprisingly, I guess, said the court decision was a blow to the US military, putting American soldiers at risk and shackling officials who have a constitutional duty to protect America. Is there any mileage in that at all?
Well, it's the expected response from the Pentagon. If you try to hold Pentagon officials, in this case the head of the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, accountable for torture or other illegal acts, that somehow shackles the hands of the U.S. military. But ironically, it suggests that the United States government needs to, demands to, and is engaging in illegal acts, and that if anyone holds them accountable, that will be, quote, shackling their effort to carry out war. It's partly demagogy, but by virtue of the nature of the argument, it also reveals that they, in fact, have institutionalized torture. Otherwise, they would not be afraid of the allegation against it.
Brian Becker, Fred, we've got to leave it there, but thanks for being on the programme. Director of the Answer Coalition, talking to us on the line from Washington, D.C.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by Jennifer Harbury. She's a lawyer and human rights activist, joining us on her webcam there in Texas in the USA. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Now, clouds seem to be gathering over Donald Rumsfeld, with stakes being pretty high, it seems. So what could be the outcome of this case, do you think?
Well, the only outcome in a civil case is that he must pay money damages to the people that he caused injury to, both of these being U.S. citizens. The rather startling outcome is that now a United States citizen can sue for torture that happened outside the United States, but someone who is not a U.S. citizen, who is probably harmed even worse or even killed by those exact same practices that were ordered and authorized by Mr. Rumsfeld, cannot sue. And worse yet, we have a criminal statute, too, in fact, that make it a felony punishable up for 20 years in prison for anyone who conspires to commit torture outside the United States. That would be Title 18 of U.S. Code 2340. There's also the War Crimes Act. Under our own laws, let alone all the international treaties, Mr. Rumsfeld should be going to jail for people that he has authorized the torture of throughout the black sites throughout the world.
Is it right, though? Is it right, though? He was obviously operating under the administration, under Bush. Is it right that he should be personally facing these charges?
It is, because he certainly authorized them. There's the very notorious document where he authorized a whole string of terrible practices, and then at the bottom said, I have to stand for 8 hours at a time during work. Why shouldn't the prisoners? The huge difference, of course, being that he could walk around and move while the prisoners had to stay in a fixed position, which causes the lymph nodes throughout the body to swell until the people can't even get their shoes back on. Usually it's excruciating. So because he ordered those, he certainly should be subject to suit. That does not mean that all of the other people who worked with him on all of this, including President Bush, of course, should not also be subject to suit. They should be.
Well, then, so if the former contractors do win this case, then, as you say, the likes of Bush and other high U.S. ranking officials, both former and current, they really could, do you think, face trial on this?
Well, they should face trial. If you break the law, you're supposed to face trial. The great travesty here being that they're not facing criminal trials. They carried out massive war crimes for years and years and years, with total disaster wreaked around the globe, and set back our international human rights treaties nearly 500 years. We don't even have habeas corpus for a number of those folks in Guantanamo and in the black sites for a very long time. I say it's a good start. It's barely enough.
Can I just ask you quickly that a lawyer representing Rumsfeld, he said that this court decision was a blow to the U.S. military, even putting American soldiers at risk. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think it's pretty silly, because all of the or a very large number of very high-level generals in the military from the beginning protested against what the White House was in fact doing. Why did they protest? They said, look, the Geneva Conventions protect us. when our own people are captured, we don't want them waterboarded, battered, humiliated, kept in freezing cells, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want that done to our own people. Don't do this. The Geneva Conventions protect us as well. Not only that, if you start doing this to people around the world, there's going to be huge blowback against our own troops, and they're the first ones who are going to be killed. So, in fact, those patterns and practices by Rumsfeld, Bush, et cetera, made the world a much more dangerous place and has probably resulted in far more people going out in the streets with different kinds of makeshift bombs and killing our own soldiers out there who are trying to protect our own country. It's hugely unjust.
Jennifer Harbury, lawyer and human rights activist. That's all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us live there in the US.
Certainly. My pleasure.